You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we'll be looking at how to capitalize in a script. We'll be using the pilot script from Stranger Things to explore capitalization, so you can expect spoilers for just the first episode. One of the most obvious tools a screenwriter has for changing the appearance of their text on a page is capitalization. It's instantly distinguishable, making the capitalized text stand out from its neighbors, drawing the eye to it. It's the text equivalent of a kid in a classroom throwing up their hand, bouncing up and down in their chair and saying me, me, me. Sure, it gets attention, but use it too much and you're sure to fatigue the reader. They'll either stop paying attention to the incessant capitalization entirely, or they'll get annoyed and just chuck the script out. My point is, yes, capitalization is a powerful tool, but it takes great restraint to wield it effectively. So let's look at the do's, don'ts, and maybe sometimes's of capitalization. Let's get the easy stuff out of the way, the elements of a screenplay that you always capitalize. I don't care if you're some avant-garde hipster who wants to change the way screenplays are written, if you're not capitalizing these elements, then no one is going to take you seriously. Scene headings, for example, are always going to be capitalized. Scenes are digestible chunks of your script, so it makes sense that each chunk is clearly delineated from one another with an easily identifiable element. The formatting pattern, spacing, and capitalization of a scene heading help it to stand out from the other text on your page. Similarly, dialogue headings will always be capitalized to demark a character's lines. It's important for an actor scanning through a script to easily pick out their own lines. That way, they can identify which scenes they're in, how heavily they feature in the script, and rehearse their lines more efficiently. By extension, quite literally, the extensions of dialogue headings will also be capitalized. That's stuff like VO for voiceovers, OS for off-screen, and continued for continuing lines of dialogue. The last element that will always be capitalized applies to teleplays. Act breaks, the beginning and ends of your acts, will always be capitalized. We may talk more about the difference between feature-length scripts and teleplays in a future episode, but I felt it bore mentioning here. Now I know I said that was the last element that must be capitalized, but I tell a teensy bit of a lie. There are two more elements that are practically always capitalized: slug lines and character introductions. Slug lines, by definition, are always capitalized. Just to clarify here, a scene heading and a slug line are not the same thing. Slug lines are lines of capitalized text which have a blank space above and below them. They're used to call attention to a particularly important moment or object of focus. In this slug line from Stranger Things, we have our attention drawn to the rifle on the wall. This will end up being an important clue to Hopper later on, so the Duffer brothers have emphasized its importance with a slug line. So yes, slug lines are always capitalized, but technically you could write an entire script without using a slug line. In saying that though, I don't know why you would. Slug lines are a great tool for breaking up the pacing of your page and fixing a unique image in your reader's mind. But yeah, sure, you could write a script without one. Character introductions are the first time a character appears in your screenplay. You'll usually refer to them by their full name and follow it with their age or age range in brackets, and then a brief description of the character. Now of course, the less important the character, the less description. You might not even put their age or their last name, but you'll almost always capitalize their name when they're introduced, like in this triple whammy from Stranger Things. Even if it's an unnamed character or a group of people or an animal, they'll almost definitely get capitalized. The only exception to this rule might be if the people you're naming aren't an important part of the scene. Maybe they're just building atmosphere, but I'd suggest that if they're important enough for you to put in the script, then they're probably important enough to capitalize. But why is that? I mean, so far I've just blindly regurgitated a series of learned lessons to you without really justifying the rationale behind them. And that's because, really, there's no hard and fast rule on most capitalization. Instead, there are generally two schools of thought on capitalization in screenplays. The first we'll call production capitalization, and the second we'll call immersive capitalization. Production capitalization comes from a more old-fashioned way of thinking, where scripts act as blueprints for their films. Certainly, this is still very true of shooting scripts today, but not so much of spec scripts. The idea here is that we should capitalize elements that are important to the production team so they can scan through and quickly break down the script. Immersive capitalization is a more modern concept, where we think of scripts as stories first and blueprints second. Spec scripts are meant to get the reader excited, to get them invested in the world or characters of your story. You're trying to sell the reader on your idea first and foremost. The production side of things can come later, when the spec script is optioned and adapted into a shooting script. Now, using these two schools of thought, let's look at some elements that are commonly capitalized, and I'll give my personal opinion on what I would and wouldn't capitalize. Shots I would always capitalize. In spec scripts, you usually don't call a shot, that's for the director to determine. There are plenty of sneaky ways around this where you imply a shot, and very occasionally you might even break the rule and write the shot in anyway when you think it's vital to conveying your story. In the opening moments of Stranger Things, for example, the Duffer brothers call the shots to give us a foreboding first impression of the Camp Hero military base. We'll explore shot calling in another episode. Most of the time, however, if you're including a shot, then it's going to be in a shooting script. And if it's in a shooting script, then it's production capitalization. Even if it's in a spec script, you obviously deemed that shot so important that you decided to include it. So of course, you want to emphasize that by using immersive capitalization. But more importantly than all of that, it's industry standard. If you include a shot, you capitalize it. End of discussion. Musical cues get a little bit more interesting, however. If you're thinking purely from a production capitalization standpoint, then you should always capitalize sound effects, since everyone involved in the audio component of the film will need to understand what sounds and music they need to create. If you're thinking from an immersive capitalization standpoint though, you might restrain yourself. If your sound effect is sudden and loud, then capitalization seems like a no-brainer. Boom, or hiss, or whoosh are crying out to be capitalized. During a scary sequence, half the terror is your audio. The guttural sound of the Demogorgon and the shriek of the door latch are essential to immersing the reader of Stranger Things in the script, making the sounds real to them, so the Duffer brothers draw our attention there. What if your sound effect is joyous or quiet? Children laughing seems a little bit more sinister if written as children laughing, and rain tapping on a roof seems like it should be much louder if it's written as rain tapping on a roof. I'm sure you can trust the context of your script to give the correct interpretation of your capitalization, but subconsciously, a lot of us are wired to read capital letters as shouting or intense feeling. I don't think there's a solid answer here, but here's my opinion on it. First and foremost, be consistent. If you like capitalizing sound effects for production purposes, then capitalize every sound effect. If you like capitalizing because you feel that sound is important enough to the reader's experience to justify having attention drawn to it, then capitalize just those sound effects. And if you only like capitalizing onomatopoeias like buzz or woof, then feel free to do that. Whatever your thinking is, keep it consistent and trust that the reader will pick up on your style. And that's my second point. Trust the reader. If they're an industry professional, then they'll probably understand that not all capitalization means screaming and intensity. They'll understand that some capitalization is for production purposes. Personally, I think the less capitalization the better. I generally capitalize all my sound effects, but I only include sounds that are vital to the story, whether that be for atmosphere or plot purposes. Let me ask you this. If you're not capitalizing your sound, then why are you including it? It doesn't matter what your answer is, what matters is that you've thought about it. Speaking of shouting, what about capitalization in dialogue? If you read capitals in dialogue, then you can almost definitely assume the character is yelling. But ask yourself this before you go chucking capitals in every intense line of dialogue. Do you really need it? Like, really need it? You want to have a sliding scale of intensity. If you're in a hectic action sequence and every character is yelling, then having every line capitalized is going to fatigue the reader. In that scenario, you might do best to leave the capitals for a particularly loud or panicked line. Capitalization, along with underlining and punctuation, give texture to your dialogue. You don't want the same texture all the way through, or it gets boring. In the D&D scene of Stranger Things, capitalization is used to show mounting tension, as Will is rushed to decide between casting Fireball and casting Protection. Even though both Lucas and Dustin are yelling the whole time, the capitals are saved for the climactic final decision. The Duffer brothers left themselves room to maneuver, another level they could raise their dialogue to. In summary, save the capitals for lines that really need it. Another place you may end up using capitals is on-screen titles. Capitals seem like a natural choice, as the information printed is usually vital to the reader or audience's understanding of the world. Titles are usually centered on the page as well, making them quite distinct. The final category of capitalization is quite broad and fully depends on which school of thought you subscribe to. Any element of action text can be capitalized depending on your thinking. Using production capitalization as your basis, you'll be capitalizing every element that needs special resources to bring to the screen. This could be special effects, props, animals, vehicles, stunts, etc. Using immersive capitalization, you'll be capitalizing elements that you want attention drawn to. These could be actions that are vital to the plot, objects or details that will be important later, or simply cool set pieces with striking visuals. You may also choose to just put the key actions in capitals, so that someone scanning through the script picks up on the basic gist of the story. Stranger Things mostly takes a production capitalization approach. The miniatures for the D&D game are capitalized, as they'll need to be specially sourced by the props department. The birthmark on Mike's face, which obviously didn't make it into the final show, is capitalized, so that hair and makeup can sort out this distinguishing mark. When Will is biking home, key landmarks like Lucas's house and the metal fence to Camp Hero are capitalized for location scouting or set construction teams. In fact, the only time capitalization is really used for emphasis in this opening sequence is when the Demogorgon appears. We get slug lines and, for lack of a better term, slug paragraphs that describe the monster's actions. This sparing use of capitals for emphasis drives home how intimidating the Demogorgon is. The rest of the work is done using italics and ellipses, techniques which we'll describe in a future episode. The important thing here is striking a nice balance. Capitalize everything and the emphasis effect of capitalization is lost. Don't capitalize enough and you're wasting an important tool that can enrich your screenplay. Most importantly, capitalize consistently. Your capitalization should be deliberate, and that means there's a thought process behind it. It doesn't make sense for your thought process to change from scene to scene. You should have an overarching hypothesis for your capitalization. Ideally, you can blend production and immersive capitalization together to achieve the best result. For example, if a giant lizard monster emerges from the sea to attack Tokyo, then the giant lizard is probably going to be capitalized, because not only does the production have to worry about it, but it's also one of those striking images that you want to stick in the mind of the reader. In essence, if it ticks multiple boxes, it's probably a good time to capitalize. And a final note. I know I'm talking about this capitalization business as though it's the most vital part of a screenplay, but of course it's not. I just wanted to draw attention to a technique that can elevate your screenwriting, push it beyond what it's already capable of. And hopefully, you've gained some new perspective on the utility of capitalization in creating emphasis. Good writing, and good luck.